All right, so this is Catherine. I'm really excited to introduce Ann Krause. She is the executive director at Hemisfair Conservancy, and we are really lucky to have her today. So thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so what we're going to start with is just talking specifically about your career and your career path. So if you'll just kind of walk us through, you can start, college years if you want, but what we really want out of the series is to understand women, successful women, and kind of the choices they made and how that path of success was kind of drawn out for them.
Well, I think that's a great question. And I love answering it because people so many times ask me, how did you get to where you are? Your career path doesn't really make sense to me. But it makes perfect sense to me, and I'll get to that in a second.
Okay,
so
great.
Let me just start by saying that I went to an all-girls private school outside Chicago for high school.
Okay.
And so I liked math and science, and I was okay in sports. The Olympics were not calling, but I was active in sports. And my guidance counselor, her husband had been a state senator, and she knew a few things about service academies. And she pulled me aside and she said, Ann, have you ever considered Air Force, West Point, Naval Academy? And of course I was like, no, I was really worried about my hair and my nails that weekend for prom. And the more I found out about it, the more I realized that that could really be a fit for me because I liked applied math and science and I liked the athletic rigor. And so I put my name in the hat and I was thrilled to receive an appointment to the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs.
Wow.
So I went from an all-girls high school to pretty much an all-boys college.
Okay.
About 10% women graduated in my class. Mm-hmm. And straight from the academy, I was a second lieutenant, and then I went to pilot training at Reese Air Force Base in Lubbock, Texas.
Okay.
And after a year of flying, turns out that I have low blood sugar, so I wasn't able to fly anymore. But the Air Force then sent me to UT Austin to get my master's degree. And I ended up using my flight training as well as my graduate degree to do some research in pilot selection. And that was really interesting. I also had the opportunity to be the officer in charge of linguist operations at Guantanamo Bay during the Haitian and Cuban migrant crisis of 1995.
Wow.
And I think another career highlight was being selected to be the executive officer for the United States Air Force Thunderbirds out at Nellis Air Force Base in Las Vegas. And I had that assignment for 2.5 years and absolutely loved it.
Okay. All right, so we're going to unpack this a little bit.
Okay.
Starting with that transition. So how was that contrast from going to this like all-girls school practically to being thrust in this very male-dominated college environment, of course, but specifically within the Air Force?
I was really glad I had a brother growing up because I was already prepared for the type of humor I would be exposed to.
Sure.
It was also really hard because I went to school with a lot of guys whose fathers had been to the Air Force Academy back when it was all men. And so my classmates grew up hearing stories about the good old days and gosh, why'd they let women in, that type of thing.
Ruined
and so,
everything.
Yeah, but it turns out that with maturity comes some understanding. And so I felt like there was a lot of progress over the 4 years I was there.
Good.
I will tell you a sad kind of corollary to that. You would think with so few women in the class that we would have bonded together.
Yeah.
That was not my experience.
Yeah.
The women, we kind of joke in the fighter pilot community about people eating their own. Well, I really found that to be true as a female cadet. I think over time, again with maturity, I think the friendships and the relationships really were solid. My best friend to this day was my best friend at the Air Force Academy. But I would say that the women as a unit were not particularly supportive of each other. And I always scratch my head about that because it wasn't as if we were competing for scarce resources. But in current day, the way I look as my takeaway from all that is that secure women seek out other secure women and are not intimidated by someone who's successful or attractive or the full package or whatever. And one thing I liked that a friend told me once is she said, if you are a woman climbing, your one hand is up here, you better make sure that you have one hand down here to help someone else up.
Yeah, absolutely. So even in that environment, it sounded like you did band with some women that had that kind of similar mindset. So was it really that bonding of the similar individuals that helped you address some of the other women that weren't so supportive, or were there other things that you did to kind of overcome that situation?
The tighter relationships I had definitely got me through that place.
Yeah, okay. That's really interesting. I think that in that type of environment, you would hope that the women or just whatever that group is that's more similar would band together. But even we see in research, when we talk about, like we see in schools now with bullying issues, girls have a tendency to hurt other girls in very different ways, even if it's not that physical aggression. That bullying comes more social interaction.
Well, it's also a very competitive environment. I'll never forget one time they had all 1,200 of us that were there for basic cadet training, and they said roughly 1,000 of you will graduate. Raise your hand if you were a valedictorian. All the hands go up. You raise your hand if you were captain of a team. You know, everyone's so. They said be prepared for what they call the Superman to bozo complex, and so you think you're all that until you are sitting next to other people who are all that, and it doesn't always bring out the best in people.
Sure.
But it made me work really hard.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so then moving along this trajectory, how was you actually achieving that pilot position? That's a huge accomplishment. And just what you had said, I mean, only 1,000 are going to actually graduate, but also being a woman in that. How did that happen? How did you overcome any of those obstacles and actually achieve that coveted pilot position?
At the time I went through the Air Force Academy, everyone who made it through the program and was medically qualified had a pilot slot.
Oh,
that was
okay.
one of the advantages of going to the academy versus another commissioning source.
Understood.
That's not always the case. It depends on the pipeline that the military needs at the time. So basically the fact that I was breathing and I passed all my classes and I could see. I wish I could tell you that it was something more spectacular than that. But flight training was really rigorous and I learned a lot and I loved flying jets. And I'm really grateful that I had the opportunity to solo in the supersonic T-38 because that is an experience that no one can ever take away from me.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, even along the way, so you said that after a year you couldn't be a pilot any longer because of the blood sugar issue. So what was that transition like for you, and how did you handle or kind of deal with that situation?
Well, when the final decision was made after a lot of medical testing, the Air Force's issue with me was that low blood sugar and low blood pressure, which I have a combination of, can be controlled somewhat by diet and lifting weights, that type of thing. But there was no 100% guarantee that we could prevent its reoccurrence. And that's why I was eliminated as a risk, if you will.
I see.
And I was really devastated because the whole reason I went to the Air Force Academy was that guaranteed spot as a jet pilot, which is what I had kind of pinned my hopes and dreams on. I'm just really grateful that in my 4 years of training at the Academy, I really gained an appreciation for being an officer and serving in whatever capacity was needed. And so after crying into my pillow for a while, I got a really nice phone call because I had applied myself academically at the Academy. The military was willing to send me to graduate school as my job. And so I went to UT and I studied differential psychology, which is similar to what you have expertise in.
Kind of, yeah.
But did a lot of job analysis and performance evaluation.
Exactly.
And I packed that together with my flying experience, and I helped the Air Force do air crew selection research, which I thought was really interesting.
Wow. Okay. And so then how did that transition to the Thunderbirds?
That's an excellent question,
Yeah.
but it all makes perfect sense
to me. Exactly.
So while I was stationed at Brooks Air Force Base here in San Antonio,
Okay.
I had gotten the attention of the commander of the Human Resources Directorate, and I became his executive officer. And different opportunities present themselves to you when you are a young officer who's eager to try new things.
Sure.
And I volunteered to be the officer of linguist operations at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba in 1995. It was called Operation Sea Signal. And we were dealing with 45,000 Cuban and Haitian migrants who were all at Guantanamo Bay seeking asylum in the United States. And unfortunately, not all of the military personnel that were there to support them could speak their language. And so there were communication breakdowns about, I need soap, I need medical attention, that type of thing. So I was brought in to be in charge of all of the linguists who were there to translate between the military personnel and these migrants. And that was an incredibly rewarding experience. And I'm so glad I raised my hand to do that. Not being a pilot anymore meant that I was a little further away from the mission of the Air Force, if you will. And so getting to serve on a deployment like that gave me a lot of job satisfaction, and I felt good to know I was helping people.
Yeah, meaningful work.
Yes.
Making a difference.
And so after I got back from that, there was what they call a special duty assignment announcement, and it wasn't your typical pipeline where you go from one job to the next. It was like you have to apply for a special job. And they were looking for an executive officer for the United States Air Force Thunderbirds, which they're stationed out in Las Vegas, Nevada. And I said, why not? It's one of those things where if you don't put your name in the hat, no one's going to show up at your door saying, "Are you interested?"
Yeah, take advantage of those opportunities.
Yes, and so that was a really intense application process. I was scared to death, I'll just tell you. I had to fly there, and I had to report in to a table of 12 officers who were all dressed the same. They all looked like Ken and Barbie dolls to me, and I just like, I don't fit. And so terrified, and each one asked a question, and I just knew I had to be on. And when they called and asked me if I wanted the job, I really almost fell out of my chair, but it was an amazing opportunity. I got to fly in the back seat of the F-16D models when they practiced. I got media training. I got to represent the United States Air Force and the Department of Defense throughout this country. And the mission at the end of the day was selling military air power to taxpayers, but we spread a lot of joy in the process, and that was a lot of fun.
Yeah, exactly.
So that was it. That's my Air Force career.
Wow. Okay. And then what? So you've had this amazing career. You're in leading this brigade team for the Thunderbirds, and then what?
Okay. I was about 31 years old. I had served for 9 years, and I hadn't had children yet. And I had been pulled aside and told that I was being looked at to do legislative liaison at the Pentagon, which sounded really sexy, but I also knew it was 16-hour days, and if I had children, I wouldn't see them, and that just didn't seem like what I wanted for myself. I'm a woman who's always wanted to have it all, but I also kind of realized I couldn't have it all to the extent, maybe simultaneously, that maybe there were some sequential choices in there. So I decided to leave the Air Force on a high note, and quite frankly, I have not looked back. I loved every minute of my service, but it was also good for me to get out, take a breather. When I left the Thunderbirds, my calendar was in 15-minute increments, and I remember planning 10 days out in advance when I would get some sleep. And so, but the opposite end of that was when I got out of the military and did not have a job lined up on purpose. I didn't have anything to do. I didn't have any children, and my husband was an airline pilot. I was bored. I would sit there programming my CD player.
I think you told me this.
Oh, it's so sad. What a sad state of affairs. So,
in 15-minute increments, though.
Exactly. And so I didn't quite know how to fill my days, but by the grace of God, I became the mother of a wonderful child named Parker, who is now going to be 16, and it was neat. I love being a stay-at-home mom. I was not looking for work, but something was missing in my life, and I didn't know what it was. Turns out all that service really is what made my heart beat. And even though I wasn't interested in getting back into the military, I knew that I needed to give something back. It might not be to my country this time, but maybe my community. So I got involved in my church more, and I got more involved in nonprofits. And that's really how chapter 2 of my career really began. And what's really kind of funny is that when people find out that you were a military officer, you end up as president of everything, whether you meant to or not. I'm like, I'll just be a VP, I'm good. And no, you should be president because you have leadership skills. And I was like, all right. But the way I always looked at it is that I'm a lifelong learner. And whatever position I take, I want to make sure that they're not just asking me because I have a 98.6 temperature and, I breathe. I want to make sure that if I'm asked to do something as a volunteer, that it's because I have a unique skill set that I can deliver that role. And simultaneously, what can I learn? How do I make myself better? I don't want to do the same nonprofit gig as a volunteer for 10 years. Do you really want to own the bake sale? So the way I looked at it is that I said yes to every opportunity where that two-way street criteria,
alignment,
we're exactly in alignment. And that's really how one thing begat the next. I wasn't ready to be president of something my first go around, but with experience and you pay attention, and there are mentors out there who pave the way for you, and they realize that you're thirsty for knowledge, and they pull you aside and they bring you in. You can learn a lot on the job, even as a volunteer.
What are some similarities and even differences between nonprofits and even just your military organization experience that you've noticed? Especially the type of people that work for nonprofits, or is it very similar? Do you
It's all
think?
about the mission.
Yeah. Okay.
That's what really brought my team together in the military as well as the nonprofits. You're usually pretty passionate about either the nation's security or what the mission of the nonprofit is, and it really does, at the end of the day, despite the disagreements or the conflicts or anything along those lines, you have that common core of belief and purpose.
Mm-hmm. So I want to talk about Hemisfair in just a little bit,
Sure.
but looking back and when I was looking you up, I'm seeing all of these different,
Stalker.
yeah, I am, totally, freely admitted, for these different nonprofit organizations. Talk about a couple of positions that really stick out for you that, either there was a specific experience or a skill set that you really felt that you were able to hone or develop as part of that. Not putting you on the spot or anything.
No, there are two that stand out to me that really help prepare me for the professional role that I now enjoy. The first of which is being a trustee at the Southwest School of Art. I love art. I do not have a talented bone in my body, but I'm an appreciator.
Yes.
And so it's really nice to be exposed to that at a very high level of play. The current president and CEO is also a female, and I respect her tremendously because she is a tremendous artist in her own right, but an administrator as well. So I've learned a lot from watching her, worked a lot one-on-one with her. And I think the reason that position was special to me was because it broadened my horizons a little bit in San Antonio. Until that time, that I joined that board, I was doing a lot of stuff that was really, really local to my church, my children's schools, that type of thing, which kept me within a pretty small bubble, and I wasn't meeting new people. And I love my friends, but sometimes there is a bigger world out there, and I wanted to meet people who had maybe different backgrounds or different experiences. And by virtue of serving on a board like that, I met people that come from all different industries, from all different backgrounds, and from different parts of San Antonio, and that opened up my eyes a lot and made me want to do something on a city level next. And it's exactly what happened.
Let's talk about,
yeah, so that
perfect
was
segue.
cool.
I mean, executive director of Hemisfair, talk about that and how that role kind of came into your life, how that kind of the alignment piece that you've kind of talked about as a theme throughout all of these different job positions.
I will, and let me go back to your previous question because
Ties
the
in
two go
nicely.
together.
Oh, sorry, I did it
No,
really
it's
segue.
quite all right. No, while I was serving as a trustee at the Southwest School of Art, I was also kind of coming up in leadership in the Alamo Heights School Foundation. I'm passionate about public education, and I care very much about my community and my kids' schools, that type of thing, and so I joined it just to be helpful. I took on a variety of positions, and when they pulled me aside and asked me if I would be the incoming or president-elect, again, I had to look over my shoulder and make sure they were really talking to me. I'm not from Alamo Heights. I'm not a fancy person, and I kind of assumed that I would never be asked to do something like that. So it was a real honor for me, and I worked really hard at it, and we had tremendous success, and it was a wonderful team. I have no complaints. I feel really good about that service. This is how it all ties together. While I was serving as the president of the school foundation, our work and my leadership got the attention of the CEO's office of a Fortune 500 company here in town. And they were looking to make some changes in their corporate philanthropy and asked me if I would come work for them. Well, at the time I had a second grader who wasn't quite ready to not see me. And so I agreed that I would do consulting for them about 20 to 25 hours a week. And that just changed everything for me professionally. So here I was just trying to serve my community, and it ended up parlaying into a corporate opportunity. And I learned so much. I was so grateful for that opportunity to learn about the other side of things. I was used to fundraising. This was on the side of grant making, if you will. And trust me, when you've been on the grant making side, it makes you a savvier fundraiser and vice versa.
Absolutely.
So that was a really interesting experience for me. But I also learned a lot in that experience, and that was that my passion really is in fundraising for causes that I care about. You can make some nice money in the corporate world, and I do not have anything negative to say about that, but it didn't make my heart beat every day. Not in the way that a nonprofit gig, when it's the right fit for you, can for me. I can only speak to my own experience.
So actually, I want to go back a little bit with this experience when you were saying to your son, second grade at the time, and having to make this decision. I think for a lot of women that would be really hard. Here you've been serving your community, you've had this one kind of exposure position, and now here this big organization is coming and knocking and asking for, hey, please come work for us. I think that would be a pretty hard opportunity not to say no, or to come back and say, oh, I will, but in this type of capacity. Talk through that a little bit in, understanding what it was that you wanted and how you moved through that to identify what actually felt comfortable for you.
Work-life balance is something we women talk about all the time, and it's not always the easiest thing to achieve. And I knew that if I went in to be a VP of a big company, that my schedule would really not be my own. Most of my friends who are VPs in corporations like that typically lose more vacation or don't use the vacation that they have just because they have a responsibility. They have a lot of expectations at work. And while I'm up for that challenge professionally in many ways, I don't think my home life balance would be what I wanted it to be. And that's why I really felt that if I were going to be getting back into the paying workforce, I wanted to do it. I didn't want to dive in. I really felt that consulting for 20 to 25 hours a week was the right segue for me to test for my family. Is this something that I can pull off? Finding out that after I did it for a while, everyone kind of got used to the idea. I got over my fatigue. I really thought I had mono. I was so tired. I thought, oh my gosh, I'm gonna have my blood tested. But it was just it was a transition.
That low blood sugar again.
It was a total transition just because I was, used to going Pilates in the morning, and then I'd do my nonprofit thing, and then I'd be home for the bus. Things changed a lot when I had professional responsibilities, but I loved them. That's the whole thing. So the trade-off was worth it for me. And
ready to take on that challenge.
I needed the intellectual stem.
Yeah. So I think it's worth being even redundant in that. The fact that you saw that opportunity as an opportunity to negotiate, I think that's, these women that I'm working with, and I just think for anybody that's even interested in this series, that's the kind of proactiveness, that's the kind of foresight that things and opportunities are going to come into your life, and it's up to you. It's not that, oh, I got offered that full-time job and it really didn't fit, so I just turned it down. No, that's an opportunity like, hey, look, they're interested in me. What can I do on my end to make me feel comfortable with accepting this position and negotiate and see what they, if they either accept or not accept. I'm assuming that when they came to you, they had something in mind, but you guys had to kind of come to an agreement about what would work for you and what would work for them.
To be honest with you, I was very concerned after my lunch meeting with them. I felt like it had gone very well and that they liked me, and I felt that, again, the two-way street was being met. But I was also concerned that because I wasn't willing to work full-time, that they were just going to have to move on down the road. And when they did give me that engagement, I was like, good for them. I'm glad that they saw that there was quality there.
Sure.
It says a lot about that particular employer, that they were kind of willing to meet me where I was. And at the same time, I was really proud of myself for not just saying yes to something that I knew long-term was not going to be a great fit for my family. The money would have been like crack, but it really wasn't a great fit for our family of 4 children and a husband who has a challenging career himself.
Understood. Okay, so now you are in alignment with this great consulting gig that really gets your heart beating, and this leads into Hemisfair. How?
It does. My consulting gig came to a natural end, and I really wasn't interested in doing more of that because I already kind of figured out that, okay, corporate philanthropy was cool. Glad I saw it, but I'm ready for my next challenge. And I ended up being approached by a major family foundation that they were wishing to get a little more strategic in their giving. And they had 3 generations of givers in their family, and they were not exactly in alignment. Turns out that sometimes with these family foundations, the consultants are brought in to maybe be more like counselors.
Facilitators.
Exactly, as opposed to that. But what was really neat is I was able to help them have some conversations about focusing impact. Instead of giving $500 to 100 organizations, what would happen if you chose fewer organizations about a few focus areas that really meant something to y'all as a family? And once that work was finished, I felt really good about that. But again, it wasn't the same as fundraising for me, and I didn't know what my next opportunity was going to be. So I was very happy kind of going back to Pilates and seeing my friends and open to what was next. I got a call from my girlfriend with whom I had served on the Southwest School of Art board. And she said, I have this idea for you. And I thought it was an idea for fundraising for the school. So of course I was all ears. I'm like, sure, I'll help. And she goes, no, I have a job for you. So I'm not looking for a job. She goes, you need to know about this. And so she introduced me to the CEO of the Hemisfair Park Area Redevelopment Corporation, Andres Andujar, who I believe is one of San Antonio's visionaries. And he laid out the plan to redevelop the site of the 1968 World's Fair that had pretty much fallen into neglect since 1968. And as soon as I saw that, I was like, oh my gosh, that is something that I can get excited about every day. And I was so inspired that I agreed to submit an application for my first full-time job since leaving the Air Force.
Wow.
And I'm so glad they picked me, because after 2.5 years, getting out in that park and telling people about it still is a really joyful experience.
I mean, and even just the progress to date has been amazing.
Yes.
You guys have accomplished so much in even just a short amount of time.
Yes.
And seeing the community really embrace it and take it on as its own. Yeah, I can understand why that heartbeat is.
We have to figure out, it's like there are things that are neat, that's cool, that's interesting, stimulating type thing, but if you're not passionate about it, I don't know, that doesn't work for me. I have to kind of be in love with what I'm doing, or else I really would rather be doing something else.
Yeah. All right, so I would say that's an amazing, amazing path. All right.
So does that make sense though? How, like, it was just a service theme?
Absolutely, and it's nice to see, and it's not just that service theme. I hear other things too, like this idea of being open to other opportunities, being willing to ask for what you want, and then the most important thing, that alignment with something that you're actually really passionate about makes a huge difference.
Joy is important to me. I like to have it, and I like to spread it.
So turning that kind of our last question around,
sure.
Then, looking back at this beautiful career that we see this nice consistent theme. What would you say your biggest, 2 or 3 lessons from that? What have you really taken away as you look back on your personal career that you would either want your children to know, or any early professional, somebody that's trying to graduate college? What are those lessons that really have made a difference in your professional career?
I think you absolutely have to say yes and be open to new opportunities. Not blindly, but if you just, for my personality type, I need that kind of stim. I need change. I need an agile work environment, if you will, and you need to know that about yourself. Some people are more comfortable maybe doing the same thing for 20 years. I don't poo-poo that at all, each to his own. But for me, I needed to raise my hand and say, I volunteer for that. Going to Cuba. I could have sat at my desk at Brooks Air Force Base and not done that, but I still reflect on my 3 months of service at Gitmo, even though it was a long time ago.
Yeah.
So I think that's important. It's also important to do that when you're young in your career. If I were to go to my husband right now with 2 kids in high school, a kid in college, and a kid in junior school, and say, I need to go to Cuba for 3 months to, serve, it might not go over as well as when I did it before children. Now, I'm not saying that people can't work that type of stuff out, but I always encourage people to study abroad if it's something you want to do. If you want to try on a new career, when you're young is sometimes a really convenient time to do it if it involves a move and there's not a relationship that you have to consider as well. So I just think being open to possibilities, doing the research, but if it looks like it could be a fit, go for it.
Absolutely. Well, it's an amazing career. Thank you so much for your time, for sharing with us today. We really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Ann.